Welcome back to the 430 Movie. We got our expert programmers here to curate fantasy theme weeks of classic films.
From 1998, film directed by Steven Soderbergh called Out of Sight.
Yes.
Soderbergh directs it with such a sort of confident, self-assured style.
Lex Luthor in Superman.
What is it about Gene Hackman that...
His performance, it's off the charts, but still in reality. Fiendishly gifted.
1981 Sam Raimi opus, The Evil Dead.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Fine choice.
Sam Raimi invented entirely new ways to get shots that should not have been possible with the amount of money that he did not have.
Charade.
Yeah.
Oh, so
Directed
good.
by Stanley Donen. It's a textbook screenplay. It's just effortless, and there's not a wrong note in this movie. Can't say enough great things about it. We'll be back next Friday with an all-new episode of the 430 Movie, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Join us now for the 430 Movie.
Hey, this is Mark A. Altman.
And this is Daren Dochterman, and this is the best of the Inglorious
Treksperts at Comic-Con at home. And we're thrilled to be with you. We only wish we were with you in person, but, cozy up to your screen, and it'll be like we're all together in San Diego.
because unfortunately, in our landing party, we both got injured. And so we are lying in sick bay right now. And the only way that we can be cured is if we relive all these moments from the Inglorious Treksperts.
Exactly. It's the only way to save us, because as we all know, clip shows are always the best episodes of every science fiction TV series.
That's correct.
That's why, look, when I think about Buck Rogers, I think about Gary Coleman, and A Blast for Buck, where Gil Gerard has to live through memories of previous episodes to figure out who's tormenting him. And it turns out to be Gary Coleman to wish him a happy birthday.
That's funny, because when I think about Buck Rogers, I think about someone completely different.
Wow. Yeah. And you know what? I know who you're talking about. And it is the wonderful and beautiful Erin Gray. And we were lucky enough to have Erin show up. And the fact is, you may think, why was Erin Gray on a Star Trek podcast? And the reason was very simple. A lot of people don't know this. She auditioned for the role of Captain Catherine Janeway.
Yeah.
And here's Erin Gray joining the Treksperts to talk about her ill-fated audition for Janeway.
Oh, that's right. You were talking about the audition.
Yeah.
Oh,
see, because there was a lot of talk back when people are talking that when Voyager was
94?
first being cast,
right,
that you were in contention for the lead that ultimately Genevieve Bujold got.
Yes. I didn't know I was in contention. All I remember is telling my agent, I want to audition for this. And he said, no, Rick Berman doesn't want you. I said, I'm sorry, but the fans and myself, I really want to do this. And I want to play the captain. Finally, I want to be the captain, which you let me be the captain. Thank you very much. And I begged to audition, and they kept saying no. They finally let me audition. And I remember they're saying, they're having difficulty with the actors because there's a lot of sci-fi dialogue. And I said, well, after 2 years on Buck Rogers, I think I can handle that. However, it's kind of hard to, how to tell this story. So they were very concerned that someone could nail this monologue. So I worked really hard on the monologue. Man, they're going to let me in the room. I got 20 minutes to prove that I can do this, right? And I walk into the room and hi, and I'm not hearing who I'm being introduced to, because all I can think about is I got to memorize these lines and I've got to stay in character and whatever. And I start the first line and I hear this voice saying, so you don't remember me, do you? We only spent 3 weeks in Hawaii together. And I went, and it's like everything in my brain disappeared. Everything. And I looked at him and I went, Hawaii. Who did I don't know. 3 weeks? Wow. And I'm thinking, and then when he reminded me that we had done Magnum PI together, I went, oh, well, you gained a lot of weight and lost all your hair, so it's really hard. That's what I'm thinking. Okay, I didn't say it.
Yeah,
No,
I would have had so much
But in
respect.
my mind, am I supposed to remember you? I mean, really, you know. So at that point, I did okay, but I didn't nail it the way I should have because I was just all the emotions were going around inside, and so I didn't that sweet spot that you work so hard to get to, and that's when I wrote in my book, by the way, Act Right. I said I just told my agent afterwards. I said anytime I do an audition, I want a list of the people who are in the room so I can be prepared to know what I'm going to be dealing with. You know,
That's so smart, and it's so true.
Yeah,
because you were totally thrown off your game by
completely.
that. And had you known who was in the room, you
I would have
been
able to, hey, good to see you. I would have remembered. We could have a nice little conversation. I would have at least been prepared for it. But instead, I did had an emotional explosion inside of myself. Not a good time for that to happen. But I really wanted that part. But I think Kate Mulgrew did a wonderful job. I'm glad she got it.
And apparently she liked bald, heavyset men.
Yes, I believe they ended up, together.
For
And
quite
I went,
a while,
I didn't have a chance once I heard that,
Oh, my God.
Goodness.
Well, and yes, and the rest is history,
It's
as they
history,
say.
right.
So there you go. I mean, boy, obviously we talked about a lot more. And, we talked a lot about Buck Rogers, but my favorite part of that interview was talking to her about Battle of the Network Stars.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't go wrong with Battle of the Network Stars.
Oh my God. It's for those who couldn't live through it, who didn't live through it, who wanted to live through it. You can still find it on YouTube. Look it up. It's something you would not believe.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
It comes from a time where there used to be networks and stars, and we don't really have those anymore. Honestly.
Daren, you know how we do the Starship Smackdown here at Comic-Con every year?
Sure.
I wonder if we could figure out a way to do kind of a battle
of the network starships.
Yeah, if we could, that could be interesting. We got to talk about it. We got a year to figure out the next Comic-Con, right? Yeah. So I look to you, Daren Dochterman, to see what we could come up with, because I think the Battle of Network Starships would be awesome. With Captain Gabe Kaplan. You could only have captains who were on Battle Network Stars. So it's Robert Conrad on the bridge of the Enterprise versus Gabe Kaplan on the Galactica.
Telly Savalas.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
That's right.
The possibilities are amazing.
Trudy from Facts of Life. It'd be great.
Tootie.
And then
Tootie.
Yeah. And you could have, Richard Hatch was on.
Sure.
Gil
Absolutely.
Gerard was on. Erin Gray.
Darn
Oh,
right.
man. Terry Copley.
Farrah Fawcett.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, look, obviously, Erin was a great guest. It was really fun to have Anson Mount down. We're all big Hell on Wheels fans. And of course, he played the role made famous by Jeffrey Hunter in The Cage and made the role his own. And a big longtime Star Trek fan. And he dropped in on the Treksperts to talk about his role in Star Trek Discovery and the upcoming Strange New Worlds. Here's just a little sense of what Anson shared with us when he was here. I want to ask you, let's talk about, Discovery, and this may be some ground that was tread before, but, was this an offer situation or did you have to audition for it?
What was?
In the case of playing Captain Pike.
Oh, okay. How did this happen? All right. So I'd been talking to them actually about Captain Lorca before the first season, and they very wisely hired Jason Isaacs. And then, so when they were getting geared up for season 2, they called back and said, "Hey, there's this other captain called Captain Parker that you might be right for." I see. It's just secretly thought to myself, it's a very boring name of a captain. And there's like, would you mind putting yourself on tape for a couple of scenes? I was like, yeah, of course. So my wife recorded me and did the off-camera lines, camera in one hand, sheets in the other.
She played Mr. Sloth.
And,
Number 2.
And then the next day they called and said, okay, let's do it. And it's actually Captain Pike. And I was so glad they didn't cast me as Lorca.
Or Captain Parker.
Because I knew exactly what it meant. I was like, wow, that's such a cool idea, and I can't believe I get to play a Starfleet captain, man. That was my make-believe game when I was like 8 years old. It's incredible.
So, a lot of people have talked about, that they really fell in love with those characters and would love to see more of them, in a future spinoff or series, and you revisit the character for Short Treks, which I wonder, was that an interesting, being the short form versus the long form and having directed and written your own short films? I wonder, what was that like for you?
I'm just going to lean down here and get some more of the branded beverage I can.
We won't tell anybody. Your secret is safe with us. The show brought to you by Coca.
By cocaine.
No, that was, if we were doing the show in the '50s, it would be.
Right. By hot cocoa.
Yeah.
First of all, I loved the idea for the short treks as a way of keeping the fans involved in a time when we're not doing 22 or 24 episodes a year. And we're making these short orders, and people have to wait for so long. I thought it was a very smart thing to do. And then when I saw it aired, and I realized it's on a streaming platform that doesn't have to deal with network programming, I was like, short films can start to be a thing now. Mm-hmm. And I love short. I've done a lot of short films. I've directed short films. I'm a big fan of the medium. That was very exciting to me, and I'd like to see more television dabble in smaller stories. I do think that storytelling, the
act of telling
Joseph
stories,
Campbell of
yes,
it all,
right.
the mythology,
Right.
the existence of mythology. There's something innately human that is going to always want to get together around the campfire together and listen to a story told. There's something in that we need to ward off the spirits and the darkness behind us.
See, that was the host of The Well talking.
Right.
Because all of a sudden he just lifted up the show, made it very erudite,
He
dropped
elevated
Joseph
us.
Campbell.
But I'm also from a long line of Southern bullshitters. So there is that.
That was a lot of fun, and I have to say that no matter what any of us personally think about Discovery, I think all of us agree that Anson Mount is great, and we love seeing him in that show.
Look, and a lot of lip service has been paid to the fact that Strange New Worlds is going to try and emulate the format of the original, be more episodic, deal with more allegory and metaphor, and be more of a throwback to classic Trek. And if that's the case, I think we have something very exciting to look forward to. I certainly hope so. Okay, one of my favorite people in any of the Star Treks, and he's so erudite. And one of the things I love about this guy is he also huge fan of classic movies like us, and also was a big fan of the original Star Trek. And the fact that we got him to talk about his experience with Star Trek: The Motion Picture, I thought was extraordinary. And of course, I'm talking about everyone's favorite Klingon, the great Michael Dorn. So here's us sitting down with Michael Dorn to talk about his first love, the original Star Trek.
Tell us about your first experience seeing Star Trek: The Motion Picture and what you thought of it, if you recall.
I thought it was really good. I liked it.
You're preaching to the choir.
I liked it a lot. I thought it was a nice introduction, and I thought it was one of the best endings ever.
The reveal.
When Collins and Persis Kambata, I just went. Literally, you kind of go, I want to be there.
Right.
I want to be one of them. And I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah. Do you remember where you saw it? When you saw it?
It was in Pasadena and I think I was on a date, and it was one of the big theaters in Pasadena because that's where I grew up, and that's where I saw it. 77?
79. Yeah.
79.
Yeah. Saturday is the 40th anniversary.
Oh, wait, what was 77?
Star Wars.
Star Wars. Thank you. Okay, yeah. So that
and
was
Damnation Alley.
Yeah.
Huh?
Damnation Alley. No, that was the movie that Fox thought was going to be the big hit that summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That shows what they know.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Michael, studio people don't often know what they're talking about. But that's all right. We still have to deal with them.
That's good. I really like that. That's really good. I love that, especially the end. But we've got to deal with it.
So you got, and then of course, we talked about, you saw Star Trek: The Motion Picture on a date. You love Star Trek 2. Comes Star Trek 6, you get offered a role.
You offered a role, and it was a wonderful role. It wasn't a starring role, but it was a nice little meaty thing. I thought it was wonderful.
You're your own grandpa.
I'm my own grandpa, and I'm in there.
Yeah.
It was very funny. I lost, and as I was walking past DeForest and Bill, DeForest goes, "Hey, he just gave me so much." It was so funny. He goes, "Hey, give me your card. You're really good. I want to recommend you to some people," because I lost big. And then Nick Meyer came down and he was saying, "Okay, Michael, I want you to do this. This line." And he did something with his hands, and I go, "I'm doing like this. I'm trying to figure out." And DeForest goes, "Not at all like you practiced last night, huh?"
Oh my goodness.
He was funny. Yeah, but there was a great fan moment because I was once again a big fan. I never went to the conventions, but I was there, and there was a moment when we were shooting one of the last scenes in the big hall at Kittimer, or whatever the case, and they had the guest stars on one side of this room, and they had the cast on the other side of the room. And they were all there.
Right.
And I'm sitting there on the guest stars, and I'm just, sitting there looking around or whatever the case, and I look, and they're all there.
Right.
And I'm in a scene with all of them. And I got to tell you something, they were all talking and joking and laughing and having a great time. And I just had a moment where I went, "Holy mother of pearl." Yeah. There's Scotty and Sulu, and I'm pointing them out and I'm doing their voices, and, "It ain't decent brand of scotch to do that, and more factor too, Captain." I mean, I was just going on and on and on. I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer, and that was my moment of like, okay, this is one of those moments in Hollywood that it doesn't come along.
Well, and the studio had made no secret of the fact that this was the last film. Yeah. It was the 25th anniversary, and then it was over for the original.
Yes.
And the success of Next Generation at that point had clearly put the final nail in the coffin for the original as well. So not in a bad way, just that they now had a new franchise with a younger cast. So that must just have been absolutely incredible for you.
I feel a little bad about that. Although I felt that we should have gone 10 years with the movie. I mean, with the TV show.
Right.
And then done the movie.
Sure.
It was so much fun to talk with him using the Gene voice. I loved that moment. It's one of my favorite moments from our podcast, honestly, because we had a lot of fun going back and forth there.
Yeah, it's funny because you did the Gene voice for Shatner.
He didn't remember how Gene sounded.
It didn't even resonate. But my God, Michael instantly was just anyone who knew Gene well, I think is really, including his own son, Rod Roddenberry, is always amazed when you break out the Gene voice.
And a little bit frightened. I mean,
a little bit frightened.
David Gerald is still frightened when I do it, so I try not to around him.
And, unfortunately, Gene has suffered under a little bit of critical revisionism in the last couple of years. And I think it's really unfortunate because whatever his foibles, and he was a showman. Yeah. But more than that, he had the goods. He created something incredibly special. And his creativity and inspiration in creating the original Star Trek was unparalleled. And I think, there've bene a lot of muckraking biographies and things like that.
Yeah.
So it was such a thrill to have the TV writer, producer, comedian Alan Spencer on the show to tell us his perspective on Gene Roddenberry. And here's what he had to say.
What happened was Gary Marshall had something called the Apprentice Writer Program at Paramount, where anybody could come in. It was not in the Writers Guild, and you were on the writing staff of a show. And it was kind of an internship, except you were writing. And many, many people broke in and they got trained, and then they got elevated to story editors and writers and producers. And Gary sat you down. All the new trainees would come in, and he said, right now you're going to be paid less than you're worth. In a few years, you're going to be paid more than you're worth. So I was floating on different shows then. There were all the different Gary Marshall and some of the Paramount shows. I was floated around, and Mork was the hot show. But it hadn't gone on the air yet, so and nobody knew who Robin Williams was. I did. Some of the industry did. But on paper, it didn't sound very promising to a lot of people, and of course it exploded into something. But so when I started at Paramount, it was very, very young, conspicuously young. I think I was the youngest writer at that time to be doing something like that. And I was nervous. I didn't know how to dress. And so I wore a ridiculous suit with a clip-on tie. I was trying to look older. And I think I looked like Pee Wee Herman, basically, coming in there. And people were looking askance at me. Some people wonder if I was an executive's son. Some people thought I snuck on the lot, which is certainly viable. But when I went to have lunch in the commissary, I also didn't know anybody. I was standing there by myself, and I felt like Carrie at the prom. That they were all laughing at me. There were some people pointing and having a go, wondering who I was, and when you're awkward, when you have that, it people can feel it, and either some people have empathy for you, or other people will have a go at you. Right. And showbiz is very mean, and people are not nice. So I was standing there, and I felt ridiculous, and I looked over, and there was a man in a turtleneck and a sports jacket who was looking at me with empathy and kind of smiling fondly. And I made eye contact with him, and I knew exactly who he was. And he came over and introduced himself, and he said, "Hello, I'm Gene Roddenberry." And all of a sudden, the world got nice at that moment. I don't know what. He was just a gregarious guy. Yeah. And I said, "I know who you are, Mr. Roddenberry. What a thrill to meet you." And he goes, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm a writer." And he didn't look askance at that. A lot of other people didn't like hearing that. He goes, "Oh, they're hiring him young." And he says, "What are you working on?" I said, "A show about an alien visiting Earth." He goes, "Oh, I had some experience with aliens, you know." And then I pulled my wallet out, the height of geekdom, and I had to show him that I had a photo of Spock in my wallet. And you should have seen his expression. His eyes kind of glazed over. But he was cool about it. He goes, I have a bigger one in my office. You know? And he said, "I'm going to remember your name. You seem like a nice lad." He said, "Come over to my office whenever you have a chance to say hello." So all of a sudden, and it was interesting because everybody in the commissary saw me talking to him, and they're just such whores. All of a sudden, they were like, "Oh,
he must be somebody."
Yes.
Yeah.
He could be the head of the studio.
Yes. Yes.
In fact, Marty Feldman did that once. Marty Feldman was my good friend. There was a launch party for the last remake of BoJack. It was the first movie that he made for a multi-year deal he had at Universal, and they had a reception at a place called Dharma Greb. And all the Universal execs were there, and agents and actors. They're all feting Marty Feldman, and I was the youngest person there. I was too young to drink. Of course, I was still. And people wondered, who is that Marty? And Marty told them that I was like Lou Wasserman's son or something.
The chairman of MCA.
Yeah, the chairman. Yeah, and he said, "I'll be running the studio in a few years." So literally everyone there was kissing my ass. It was so horrific. Bringing me drinks and offering me cars. And,
Coke.
Yeah. No, there wasn't any blow. They offered me clean needles, but so it was just sort of funny. The next day at the Paramount commissary, I walked in, and Gene Roddenberry, I think he was there with Susan Sackett, was having lunch, and waved to me, "Hi, Alan, how's it going?" And I was with some of the other writers from the show. They go, "You know him?" And I was like, "Yeah."
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Don't you?
Yeah. He knows my name. One of my favorite memories of that time is, one of the reasons I wanted to come here is there's a cottage industry a little bit, and I guess you probably talked about it here because you've been defenders of it, of people occasionally bashing Gene Roddenberry, have their own agenda to take shots at him, casting aspersions about him as a writer or as a producer. And they all have their agendas. And nobody else gets this. I don't understand it. You know, Rod Serling doesn't get it, Ian Fleming. There are no books coming out going, bashing these people.
I can only imagine how that was, being there at that time. Because Alan paints a great sort of word picture of the situation there, and certainly talking about the computer and everything. But it just goes to show you that, of course, there were other contributors to Star Trek over the years, absolutely. But Gene was the ringmaster. We talked about this analog before. Gene held it all together, certainly at the beginning, and made the show go. And it was his guidance that brought everybody along. And I think we shouldn't forget that.
I don't think people realize what a massive undertaking it is to carry a show on your shoulders. Yeah. And when Star Trek was created, there was literally nothing like it on television. There had never been anything like it on television. Yeah. And everything was invented from the ground up. And there was such an attention to detail. And that's all because of one man, because of Gene Roddenberry. Now, of course, we had people like Gene Kuhn, who came on later, who took the seed that was planted by Gene, and watered it, and it flourished. Absolutely. And John Meredith Lucas, and a lot of DC Fontana, a lot of people were involved. But you can't take away the magnitude of Gene Roddenberry's original creation, and just what a really special person he was.
Absolutely.
Speaking of special, who I loved having one of the shows we always try to spotlight on this on Treksperts is one that doesn't always get the love of some of the other shows. And I think for us who are, obviously it's no secret, classic Trek fans through and through, the show that comes closest to us is Deep Space Nine, which was really a remarkable show. And I think also the underdog. And I'm not talking about the Shoeshine Boy from the cartoon. I'm talking about the, underdog in terms of the one that got, a lot of disrespect, and only now is really being, I think, reappraised for many reasons. But, at the heart of that show, was Avery Brooks, of course, and the second in command, the Bajoran first officer, Nana Visitor, who played Doctor, who played Kira Nerys. And we were lucky enough to have Nana drop by the studio to talk to us about Deep Space Nine. And here's what she had to say.
So when I got Deep Space Nine, I thought, I'm going to take care of guest stars as best I can, because I know what that feels like. You're working under the worst circumstances possible. Yeah. You're just kind of in there fighting.
And you're also fighting this perception, because let's face it, it was syndication, and people who didn't know the show, it's sci-fi, it's like aliens with bumpy noses, and so if you don't know it, you think, okay, well, it's a paycheck. What is this? And then you realize, oh, wait, this is something special. And then you start to have people like Frank Langella and Louise Fletcher.
The thing. We started to get very fancy guest stars. Yeah. And that was an indication that we were going to stick around, number one, and that people were going, oh, this is interesting stuff. The minute Frank Langella came on, I thought, okay, all right. We've arrived in some way here, even though it was even though it was always under the radar, which served us well. There wasn't a lot of people telling us what to do. They didn't care.
Right. And isn't that the beauty of it? It's like
it was the beauty.
You had a network, a studio that didn't care. A front office that didn't care. They were always chasing other things, the next show or the show before it.
Right.
But just after that premiere, they just sort of gave up on you, and you got to do your own thing.
You're this weird show. Go on then, and it was great.
It's really hard when you're on the inside looking out, at a show, because it's like you have a certain perspective. But when did it dawn on you that like you were working on something, really, really special?
When I saw the pilot put together. They sent it to me because I couldn't go to I had the flu, of course. I was doing too much, and when I saw the pilot, when I heard the music. I couldn't believe it. I thought it was beautiful. I became a huge fan of the show, very passionate. I loved what we were doing. I thought it was so interesting and so different. And I had an opportunity to play a person that I wouldn't get a chance to play anywhere else. You know, doing the whole I mean, I had such a range that I could do, from being a Cardassian to being the intendant, all different aspects. It's like, what is it, 12 archetypes, whatever they are. Right. I almost got to do them all. Right. It was crazy.
Right. Yeah, and it's like, oh my God, you mentioned the attendant. I mean, it's like, you just looked like you were having so much fun doing those mirror universe
now,
stories.
That's one place where you go into comedy very easily, right. And I wanted to push the envelope, and hopefully I didn't go over so that she had no sting to her. I wanted her to be a scorpion.
Yeah.
I wanted her to be slightly foolish.
It's amazing with that deep bench of supporting characters that you guys got serviced as much as you did, because
oh my God,
I mean, to have Andrew, and to have Casey, and to have the list just goes on and on. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey in 9,000 roles. I mean, that's kind of the joy of that show too. It's just like, that it's just so rich.
Each one better than the next. They were such great actors. It was so fun to come to work.
And it never felt like they were taking over the show. It always felt like everybody was kind of part of kind of one big tapestry, as it were.
In that it was like a theater company.
Yeah.
This time you're doing the lead. This I'm carrying the spear. It was great. I mean, I think that's where we all felt comfortable.
Yeah.
You were part of like the big three. I mean, so you were almost always working. I mean, Kira was always in the center of it.
Yeah.
So there wasn't much downtime,
Not a lot.
And
it was tough to do that show and have a 3-year-old and be pregnant.
Right.
Oh my God.
And you're the woman of action on the show.
And be the woman of action. Yeah. And they're putting me in, skin tight.
Right.
Sure.
But it's like, well, you know what? And I had to make these decisions. It's like, yeah, this is what pregnancy looks like for me. Some people come back and we see those people that, not me. I gained 60 pounds. Here it is.
Right.
We'll slowly watch it come off together. That's just the way it was. I couldn't have an ego about that.
She was delightful.
That's absolutely delightful.
She was just, her energy is so nourishing and fun, and oh my goodness, what a pleasure to have her come to the show.
It's funny, every time we have somebody I really like on the show, I always think to myself, I got to put him in something, and I've been lucky enough, to cast a couple of people, whether, Shatner for Enterprise, or, we had Erin Gray. The way I got to know Erin was we cast her on Pandora for a season, and then Now Visitors, like on my short list. Like, I gotta find something for her one day. But somebody I did actually put in the show in Pandora, like a few weeks after they were on Treksperts, was this next actor. And, one of the gifts of Deep Space Nine was its deep bench of supporting actors. It created this rich tapestry, this ensemble that it can't be topped. I mean, you had Andrew Robinson as Garrick. You had, certainly, Max Grodenchik as Rom, Chase Masterson as Lita. You had so many, Marco Lamo, who was just tour de force as Ducat. But I think one of the people who had the unenviable task, who literally ended up playing 3 roles in the series, and then would once again return as another character in Enterprise.
He took up an inordinate amount of that bench, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. Because not only did he play Avorta, but he played also a Ferengi, and then he also played a something else.
Andorian.
No, well, Andorian in Enterprise.
Later,
yeah, and that, of course, Shran, which, of course, I'm talking about the incomparable Jeffrey Combs. Absolutely. And Jeff came down and spent some time with us on the Treksperts, and here's what he had to say.
What a booster you are for Star Trek. I mean, anyone who's seen that recent documentary that Shout Factory put out, Ira Bear's What We Leave Behind, you're all over that. What We Left Behind. What We Left Behind. I stand corrected. So Jeffrey is all over that, and I didn't realize because for some people, a recurring gig on a show, it's just that. It's a gig, it's a paycheck. But clearly it was a passion for you.
Well, it didn't start out to be a paycheck. Well, I suppose it did. I mean, I never would have imagined when I first, I'm just a schlub with an audition, and I go in, and let me tell you, there were a couple of times I didn't get the gig. Thank you very much, and you never hear anything. So when I did get cast, it was for a oneer, a character that I did not recur in, and I thought, that's it. That's my foray into one of my childhood enthusiasms, the original series. And just so I can check that off, and I'm good. So little did I know that it's the little things, guys. Just so happened that Rene Aubergenois, who I'd done theater with, I reconnected with him on set, even though I didn't have any scenes with him. And he turned to the producers and said, how about Jeff for this other character, Brunt, a Ferengi? And they were a bit resistant because I just did a guest star. They were like going, no, no, we don't do that. But he prevailed, and I started recurring as Brunt, Liquidator Brunt. And that's when Ira Bear walked up to me and said, we really like what you're doing, and we want to bring you back as a character where we see your face. I'll never forget that, where we see your face. It was like, well, okay, Hollywood bullshit. I'll believe it when I see it. Well, maybe 3 weeks later, I get a call, and it's Weyoun, but Weyoun died at the end of the episode. So it's like, oh, okay, who am I to know how these things... I have to tell you that when Enterprise was announced as a series, I had some wish or hope that, well, hey, I have recurred and maybe proven myself here. Maybe there's a role. Maybe there's a role in the main cast, right, that I might try for, and I heard nothing. I had nothing, and so I was a bit miffed. Actually, I was not. I was like, okay, fine. This is so typical. This is so typical of Hollywood, right, in general. There's really no
loyalty.
Loyalty. It's always new and improved. It's just we're just widgets. Fine. I feel the love, not right.
Well, I know Renee used to talk about how liberating mask work and prosthetics is.
Yes.
And for you, who it can be difficult, I think, being associated with such an iconic role like Herbert West in Reanimator, and yet you have the mask work and the prosthetics were so liberating because you got to play not just one character, not just two characters, but I mean, what was the grand total on the amount of roles you played over your tenure with Star Trek? It was quite substantial.
I don't know, 6 or 7 mask work. Yes, yeah. Now, because what is playing an alien in Star Trek or any other manifestation but mask work? And so a lot of actors aren't comfortable with that. This is their tool, and they think that if you took that away from them, they're lost, and a lot of them are. But some people go with it, and Renee is certainly one of them, where you embrace that, and it actually informs and helps you to fulfill something that otherwise, without it, you couldn't do.
Yet again, he's dynamic in a very quiet manner. It's sort of his presence is well felt when you're talking with him, and I think all of that comes forth in the characters that he does.
Yeah, but I obviously, Daren, you are very accomplished and well-known concept designer, working on shows like everything from Picard to Westworld to movies like Master and Commander and X-Men 2 and I think X-Men 3. I stand corrected. That, I guess, a Freudian slip. I tried to, yeah. But so for us, and me being a writer and a producer, it's not just about showcasing the people in front of the lens, but the people behind the camera.
Yeah.
And we've been lucky to have a lot of those people on the show over the last couple of years. And one of my favorites, who's shown up a couple of times now, is a producer and writer, Brannon Braga. And one of my favorite appearances he had on the show was when he came to talk about the movie Generations, which was the first movie to feature the Next Generation cast, and what was and what could have been. What was the Led Zeppelin song? What is and what never be, or what could it never? Anyway, it was so. And one of the things I've always liked about Brannon, he's very candid assessing his tenure on Star Trek.
Yeah.
He's very proud of the work he did, but he can also be very. He knows Sub Rose is garbage. It's like, I love the fact he's not shy about assessing his work honestly.
He has a healthy perspective.
A healthy perspective, and his work speaks for itself. I mean, he had a huge role in shaping Generations, wrote some of its greatest episodes, of course went on to showrun Voyager and co-create Enterprise with Rick Berman, and he started as an intern, so it's a fascinating story. He's gone on to do shows like The Orville. I'm a big fan of his, so it's always great to have him on the show. And here's what he had to say to talk about the 25th anniversary of Star Trek Generations.
We've had this discussion many times on the podcast that everyone has a different view of it and a different starting point, and we all tend to embrace that which brought us into the family. And
the
the
nostalgia can't be discounted as a big influence.
Absolutely, but that's where the movie, the movie kind of, and there were reshoots. The movie, we tested the movie and people liked it, but they didn't like the end, and they didn't like the way Kirk died. And
how does that feel for you? I mean, here you make a movie, and I assume at the time, there's the excitement of, you just been your first feature. Everyone's telling you it's great. You go in to test it, and then all of a sudden the numbers come back and they're not stellar, and suddenly the studio's like, we got to reshoot the ending.
Yeah. Well, it was all so new to me that I was just kind of taking it in. I wasn't surprised at the ending. I certainly didn't know how to fix it.
Did you have that feeling in your gut, like it just wasn't working and you were waiting for the other shoe to drop? Or when you saw it together?
It was purposely anticlimactic. And I don't remember, there was a cinematic reference Ron and I had watched. It might have been a John Wayne movie where he was shot in the back. Mm-hmm. And we thought underplaying the death,
right,
not making it grandiose, would have some, would be kind of shocking and unexpected, but it just was flat as a pancake, and people hated it. And the solution was to make the whole sequence much more grand, and I've said it a million times. Kirk should have died on the bridge, not under a bridge.
Right.
But that's not the movie that we made.
Star Trek works well when it's space opera, and it is kind of, Ricardo's larger than life, Shatner's larger than life, and it works, and it works on the big screen. And that's something I want to go to that Daren said, where he talked about, and you said, $30 million, it was a pretty sizable budget, and he says, well, once you count in the above the line, it's not. And one of the things I felt that the movie suffered, because if anyone who's read the original script, there's some great scenes that got lost because of budget. The Romulan attack on the space station, and there's that really fantastic battle on the deflector dish, which you sort of revamped for First Contact, which is one of the great scenes in First Contact, but where they have a fight once the ship crashes and they're fighting on the ship in the wreckage of the Enterprise. It's kind of really cool and very cinematic. And for me, because Next Generation was such a cinematic show, particularly the finale, that in a movie you really got to amp it up. Otherwise, what's the difference between the TV show and the features? And when the budget was cut and things got smaller and smaller, and then the resources you have are going to things like being on the boat, that hurts. Ultimately, the movie. Do you remember anything about? Maybe it's a long time, some of the scenes that were cut or any, sort of kill your darlings?
I have much more vivid memories of the making of First Contact because I was more heavily involved in producing the show.
Sure.
And I was there for everything. but I remember that the crash of the Enterprise had to keep getting scaled back, and I do remember the fight on the dish you're talking about. And you're right, we did it in the next movie. You know, if I had to pick one example of the film falling short in terms of being a movie versus a television show, was there's this battle with Lursa and B'Etor, the Klingon sisters, right? And when their ship blows up, it's a shot used from another movie. Right. We didn't make our own shot, and I hated that. I'm like, people are going to be watching this in the theater. They know that shot.
Right.
They're going to know that we reused this shot. And that, to me, is an example of, you know, I don't think it was a good decision at all.
That was fun. It's
Sounds
interesting.
Sounds like fun.
It sounds like fun. It's really interesting to hear his, you know, present day take on what happened on that show and the ramifications of everything and his perspective since then. It's fascinating for him to open up like that.
Yeah, but he wasn't the only one. You know, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is how many people were huge fans of Star Trek before they got to work on the more recent iterations. Obviously, Ron Moore. I mean, you know, his whole Klingons were shaped by reading The Final Reflection, a novel, you know, as a kid. Another person who was deeply influenced by Star Trek and was immensely entertaining on one of his many appearances on Treksperts was, of course, the great Bryan Fuller, who went on to do Pushing Daisies and the brilliant Hannibal. But he joined us to talk about the 40th anniversary of the motion picture, which we spent a whole year honoring back in 2019. And so let's hear a little bit of Bryan looking back at that seminal motion picture that we love so much.
I guess my first exposure to Star Trek were the motion picture was the action figures. So I'd seen the trailers, and once again, it was marketed a bit like a horror film because there was a big monster coming for us, and the Enterprise was the only thing between us and the monster, and I thought that was fantastic and really gripping. And also, I loved that the Klingons were redesigned and looked more alien. And when I finally did see it on cable, the beginning with the Klingons is my favorite opening to any Star Trek film because they expose you to an alien race. They're speaking a different language, and they look alien, and the visual effects sequences, just watching that last night, it's beautiful. You know where every penny of those $46 million went for that budget because the effects are such wonderful world building. So I was obsessed with the Klingon action figure, which my parents wouldn't let me have, so I stole it. And that's what you get. Sorry. Give me what I want. And when I finally saw the film, it really resonated with me as a horror film and a horror story at the same time that it was exploring great human qualities of each of these characters, you know, sometimes to a flaw. You know, there is moments in the film where I was like, that's great character building, but I can see how it's dragging the narrative. But I was transported, and successfully, as opposed to
the horrible mistake at the beginning of the film where
they're forming
those two wonderful people are turned inside out.
One of the things I wanted to hear you sort of pontificate about is that it was unheard of for a major studio to take the cast of a television show that went off the air 10 years previously and put them in which was at the time one of the most expensive movies ever made. But at the same time, the function of that was it created a continuity. Right. Yes, we had the menagerie showed us the cage, but that was the first leap in Star Trek continuity that was amazing. But this, showing us these same actors, bringing them back, updating the ship, updating the uniforms, updating the whole universe created, I think, the beginning of what is modern continuity in storytelling, especially in genre storytelling. And you did something amazing with continuity on Hannibal, where you were able to flip and change continuity, but it seemed very much of a piece. Like when I saw Hannibal, which is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, I was astonished as someone who's read Thomas Harris's books, how you were able to change things and yet still make it feel of a piece, that you had continuity. How did the continuity of Star Trek: The Motion Picture and the fact that it updated a universe but still kept it the same, how has that affected you in your storytelling over the years? And Star Trek as a whole, how do you feel about the continuity of the show, and what does that all mean? And do we need continuity?
I think continuity is a double-edged sword in some ways. I think, with what I loved about the motion picture was that time had passed. And they really told that story visually and through its characters. You see how Kirk is a guy who hasn't been out in space for a while, and this isn't the ship that he left, and he wants it back. And just like so in a way, Kirk was the audience. We wanted those characters back. We wanted this world back. And what was so beautiful about someone like Robert Wise, who is an incredibly elegant filmmaker, to have him take the helm and really deliver a Kubrickian interpretation of Star Trek as opposed to a Lucasian?
I think it's Lucasian.
A Lucasian?
He's Lucasian.
A Lucasian, a kind of, frothy, fun fantasy. You took somebody who was much more of an intellectual filmmaker and applied a thoughtful interpretation to Star Trek and provided the audience that new look that was not different. It was just time had passed and technology had advanced. Yeah, I like wholeheartedly. I wanted more.
I'm so happy to hear, people who are well established give their opinions on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and the love that is there for that, because it's long been a almost forgotten film in some people's minds. And I think that as the years go by, we're starting to realize just how magical it actually was. And it didn't fulfill a lot of people's expectations, but perhaps that's not a bad thing. Perhaps it fulfills something grander, something more than just the sum of its parts. And I think that's how I think about it.
Well, it's gone through a real critical resurgence and reassessment, because for a long time, I think the cast dismissing it was doing no favors, and it got labeled with the motionless picture pejorative, which is not at all true. And I think only now people are realizing, and for a whole generation that watched it on home video, they didn't realize, in a theater, the theatrical scope and sense of awe that motion picture evoked. And it really is the end of an era for Star Trek, and a whole new era begins with the next film, which of course is Star Trek II, which ushers in a different kind of Star Trek, which is it's less tied to the original show. It's less tethered to the original show.
It's a little more populist.
It's a little more populist, which isn't to say that it's not great, because of course it is. But Star Trek II was the end of an era. Star Trek I was the end of an era, and Star Trek II was the beginning of a whole nother era. And one of the people who does not get the credit that he deserves, who was such a huge part of Star Trek II, was its producer, Bob Sallin. It was the only Star Trek movie he worked on. He had a big falling out with his old college friend, Harv Bennett, at the end of that picture, and left Star Trek forever. But we were thrilled to have him on the show, where we could sort of give credit where credit was due and attest to his can-do attitude. See what I did there? See what I did?
Very, very, very clever, very witty.
It's an interesting thing, because here you hadn't done features and you just sort of swept in. But it's important to understand the context in which Star Trek II was being made. the fact that they had just made a very, very expensive movie that made a ton of money, but it would have made a lot more money had it been done cheaper. So now they're doing it under the aegis of the TV division.
That's correct. The first one cost, was budgeted at about 20 something, I believe, and it went to 44, 46. Right. And half of that was in visual effects. They simply didn't know what they were doing. I hate to say that, but I quizzed a lot of prisoners separately in their cells. Well, it's what you do when you want to learn to make the same mistakes that other people do. And I found out that there was just a lot going on there that was sad. I mean, it's sad because it got in the way of a really happy and good film. It could have been. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a big fan of that first one, to be candid. I mean, it's... I suppose for the believers, it's a wonderful exercise, but I never felt that it was a really first-rate piece of storytelling. Anyway, so I came aboard, and how to make the transition, because in my heart of hearts, I'm a director. Mm-hmm. But one thing you learn when you have a business of your own is the bottom line, and you end up being really a producer whether you want to be or not, because it's kind of unforgiving. And it's quick, and there's a lot of turnaround, and you have to really be disciplined. The second thing that I realized helped me enormously was that working in commercials, you're always dealing with something that cinematically is different. One moment it could be a job that has a lot of visual effects. The next minute it's a comedy or a dialogue spot with people, or it's a car commercial, or it's an airline commercial. I did all those. And so you have to either learn or know what questions to ask and who to ask them to. And I think that above everything else put me in good stead for this. And as I got deeper into it, I was shocked. And I guess at this point in my life and at this point in time, I can be honest and say this, I was shocked at how much a lot of people that I dealt with didn't know anything. About the craft.
Would you be surprised to know that still happens?
They haven't gotten any smarter. Well, that's disappointing.
It is to me, too.
No, it's kind of frustrating because you presume going in, you go to the big Paramount sign and everything, that these people are really on it.
Yeah.
And, some were, and fortunately I hired everybody, again, in the commercial world. You have to kind of be on top of who's really good, because your clients aren't going to hire you.
Right.
If they can get that from somebody else.
Exactly.
So you have to appear and hopefully know what's going on, who's doing the best work, and so on.
You mean you got to know your stuff?
Yeah.
I'm curious, what was your relationship with Harv? So it sounds like you were the physical producer of the
film. Were you functioning as a line producer pretty much, or?
I think definitions are very difficult in this world. As you know, different people get the titles, and some people do the work, and other people like the titles. It was like any other feature film, in my opinion, unless maybe it's Spielberg and maybe Dick Donner, who my dear buddy. It's a combination of talents and events and luck. Yeah. The bottom line is, if you're asking me who actually created the look of the picture, who actually styled the picture, who actually worked on the story of the picture, and who brought it in on budget, I'm afraid that's me.
Well, there you go.
I have to be honest with you. And if you talk to anybody who worked on the picture, they will tell you the same thing.
Well, I love the fact that Harv had in his contract executive producer, because in television, executive producer is the better credit. But then he realizes it's like halfway through the movie, wait, I want to be producer on this.
Yeah. Well, not unlike a lot of people in our business, they want the credit without doing the work.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that episode was so filled with things that I had never heard of before. It's such a joy to talk to someone who has a perspective that you've never heard before. And that's what Bob Sallin brought.
Well, for many years, he did not have an outlet to tell his stories.
Yeah.
And so to have him, and Bob's really become a friend of ours as well.
Yeah.
And I'm thrilled, that we can really spotlight his contribution to Star Trek. And of course, he's been called the man who saved Star Trek, which is a bit of a misnomer, but there's no taking away from the genius of Nick Meyer. Certainly that 10 days of rewriting those awful scripts that he'd been handed when the show was about to be put in the turnaround. Paramount, and basically came up with the script that got the movie greenlit, is a testament to the genius of Nicholas Meyer. He'll be the first to tell you he's a genius, but he's a wonderful, brilliant, super talented filmmaker. You know, we love his movies, you know, like Time After Time. Star Trek II is, you know, obviously a seminal science fiction movie. And, you know, having Nick, it's always a great time talking to Nick because he's super erudite. He always has something interesting to say. And his appearance on the Treksperts was no exception.
And so they sent me these 5 scripts. In those days, you don't hit send. You send a van.
Yeah.
With all these things, and you sit and I'm like reading them and reading them and reading them, and then I made my suggestion, which is, why don't we just pick the things we like out of all these things, and like I'll try to write a new script, and basically that's what wound up happening. Except they said, your idea is great, but it won't work because we need a script in 12 days to give to Industrial Light and Magic to produce the effects in time for the opening. I said, what opening? And they had already booked the movie into theaters before we'd rolled a camera.
Did it again, yeah.
And I'm young and idiotic, and I said, well, I think I can do this in 12 days, but we've got to, get on with it now. So, we picked these things. So technically, on one level, I wrote the script, and on another level, the story was written by everybody and his brother, because there was the Kirk Khan story, there was the Kirk and his son story, there was the Genesis Project story, there was the Lieutenant Savick story, and I just Rubik's Cube.
Yeah. I got to imagine. I mean, here you're coming off Time After Time, critically acclaimed, beloved, but not particularly financially successful at the time. And now for your second film, you're doing Star Trek. A franchise that you didn't have any particular affinity for, and you're being told most of the time there's no money, So do you remember at all what it was like? Were there ever those dark moments of the soul where, like, what have I gotten myself into?
I don't think so. I think I was too busy to have dark moments of the soul, and I was, in a way, having too much fun. One of the nice things about making that movie was that I was, to a very large degree, left alone. Executives were always so busy doing whatever executives do that I was left alone. And I was left alone to reinvent this thing because there were so many things I didn't understand. Rightly or wrongly, why don't they read books? But otherwise, why are they running around in pajamas? I didn't understand any of that stuff. So why do the ships look like Holiday Inns as opposed to like submarines or destroyers or whatever it is I thought they should look like? So I was having a field day. The first day I walked around the bridge set, I said this, and this, and this, and somebody whispered to me later, "You just spent $60,000, kiddo." And I didn't know, and I wasn't thinking in those terms. I was very aware of the time pressure because it was all hurry. And maybe that was not so bad, but we shot during the day, and I edited all night. I think there was like a couple of weeks there where I just didn't see daylight because I was eating lunch in the dark while looking at dailies, and I think it's an artist's job is to figure out how you can leave things to the audience imagination, because that's how you draw them in, make them work. In Henry V, the chorus says, "On your imaginary forces work. Think, when we speak of horses, that you see them planting their proud hoofs in the receiving earth, for 'tis your thoughts that now must deck our kings," etc. And that's what I think it tends to be missing in a somewhat literal-minded, and you become very passive, and I start falling asleep in movies that don't give me anything to do, nothing to chew on.
Well, I mean, then obviously it begs the question. Obviously, there was a lot of controversy recently, or I shouldn't say controversy. There was a lot of discussion about what Martin Scorsese and Coppola had to say about Marvel movies.
Well, he said, if I remember, the key sentence of what Marty said was, "There's no sense of revelation."
Right.
Well, I think he has a point. I mean, I don't go to see those movies anymore. I don't go to see any movie that ends in the word man.
I think
with the exception of Searching for Sugarman was the only one I went
So The
to see.
Irishman is right out.
Oh,
That's his superhero movie, The Irishman.
I'm going to go see that tonight. That's very good. Yeah, that was great. That's terrific. Irishman, yeah, the Irishman. Big eye. I wonder if he's in spandex. I'm going anyway.
At the Egyptian.
That was a fun one. It was a little bit tenuous at the beginning because we were all, he was feeling us out. We were feeling him out to see which direction things were going to go. And it was fascinating. I think he finally warmed up when Ashley made a
The Irishman.
The Irishman as a superhero movie. And I think that, at the end, he enjoyed his time on the show, and I hope he did.
Well, Nick doesn't suffer fools gladly, and he always starts with the same story. And I think that's to sort of test his interviewer. He says, "Yes, it was his real chest," and if you like give it a big laugh and like it's the first time you're hearing it, he has no respect for you, And it's like if you say, "Yeah, we've heard that story like 60 times, and yeah, we know we don't care about Ricardo's chest." I think then he's like, "Oh, okay, these guys, they're for real."
It's not just the surface thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And
to be fair, we sort of brought him in with a little trick to talk about his very fun book. But of course, we wanted to, at the end, talk about some Star Trek.
Yeah. I mean, he had been writing a series of books from the perspective of Dr. Watson about Sherlock Holmes, who's his favorite fictional character.
Yeah.
Of course, he famously wrote the screenplay for 7% Solution based on his book. And last year he published the Sherlock Holmes in the case of the peculiar protocols about and it's a wonderful book. And he just finished a new book, a new Sherlock Holmes book that'll be coming out. And the way we feel about Star Trek is the way he feels about Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
So that's great. And speaking of Star Trek 2, I thought there was nothing new we could learn about Star. Literally, I mean, there was nothing new. What could you tell the Treksperts that we don't already know about Star Trek 2? Right. But in talking about the deleted and omitted scenes of some of the Star Trek movies, we did learn a lot about the famous or infamous and obscure omitted scenes with Khan's baby. In Star Trek, there were scenes on SETI Alpha 5 that were in the script in which we would have learned that Khan had a child with Marla MacGyver's. And in one of probably the most ill-fated, most ill-considered, awful decisions, the baby would have been seen on the transporter pad of the Reliant, attracted by the lights of the Genesis torpedo, about
to wandered in there
to detonate.
Yeah,
and to the everlasting credit of everyone involved, that scene was excised. But we did talk about it with the great Eddie Egan, who was the publicist at Paramount on the time for so many movies. But obviously, for our perspective, his stories about Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, and Star Trek 4, and of course, Star Trek Motion Picture, utterly priceless. We've had Eddie on the show a couple of times now. I'm always thrilled to have him. He loves movies. He loves Star Trek, the motion picture, the Star Trek movies, the Star Trek cast. For him, it wasn't just a job; it was an adventure.
Yeah.
And here we are talking about the lost Khan's baby footage of Star Trek 2. A lot of people aren't aware of, which is the kid on SETI Alpha 5. The storyline regarding Khan's, Khan's, their kids on the planet. Obviously, whether they're Khan's kids, I don't know, but I want to speak to that because there are, over the years, there've been a couple of times these photos have found their way into circulation. One, which of course is the face in the window of the cargo carriers that Chekhov and Terrell see when they first land on SETI Alpha 5. And then there's this weird shot that a lot of people think is just a deep fake of a baby on the transporter pad at the end on the Reliant, which is not. It's actually
with the Genesis
Genesis machine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So, if you would, gentlemen, why don't you sort of lay out the table? And I want to thank, I think it was Fact Trek, who was kind enough to send along the actual pages and had access to the work print. I want to credit where credit is due, where they validated this was shot.
Well, there was dialogue shot which referred to the child. Look, I have a pretty good memory, but as far as I can remember, they never actually shot with a child in the cargo carriers. It may have been someone's child,
right?
Like just put there. I do remember the baby on the transporter pods because that machine made so much noise when it was turned on that they tried to do something and the baby cried or crawled off or kept looking at the camera, but that thing was incredibly loud. I don't know if you guys have ever heard the production audio.
No.
It was deafening.
Wow.
So I don't remember. I do remember like that we killed all of those photos. By the way, let me just go off on a little tangent. All these photos you see now of behind the scenes stuff, including the memory wall, and I'm telling you where all of those came from. They all came from Majel Roddenberry.
Sure.
Because they had a contract. They got a copy of proof sheets as part of their Lincoln Enterprises deal. And they weren't obligated to observe the kills. And kills, for those who may or may not know, are either actual actors' contractual rights to not use photograph that is not flattering, or something the studio kills because a scene has been removed, or
a plot element revealed.
Plot elements, right?
Yeah, it's it's eye-opening because for years and years we never heard anything about this. It was just not there was no information, and then all of a sudden, boom.
Yeah, no, absolutely
revelatory.
And so occasionally you get somebody who you've read interviews with, you've interviewed maybe yourself many times, and then they just share all the stuff you've never heard before. And that was the case with producer Ralph Winter, who joined us to talk about his experience doing the Star Trek movies. And of course, he was on the lot doing post-production on TV shows like Happy Days and Police Squad, and saw the pandemonium of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, only to get involved with post-production on Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, and then eventually produced Star Trek 3, 4, 5, and 6. And he would have produced the Academy years had that premise to do a prequel with how Kirk, Spock, McCoy met at the Academy actually come to pass. And Ralph talks about all that with us on the Treksperts, and here he is.
I like what you're saying, Daren, that we were reaching really far. And I don't think we saw past our success of Star Trek 4, and we thought we could do no wrong. Right. And we missed key elements and key pieces in putting that together. So,
well, it has some of the best character moments in any of the films. And we talked to David about this. I mean, that's where, unfortunately, the special effects people taint it. They can't the same way that people now, can't watch a Hitchcock movie with bad rear projection. They're like, oh, those cheesy old movies. And they can't get past it. It was like, but the movie's brilliantly, it's Ernie Lehman and it's this and it's brilliant and the acting and everything. And they're like, no, but it's corny. And it's the same thing. You got to watch Star Trek 5 and say, okay, the effects, aren't successful. But what about that movie is successful? Well, there's quite a bit that is successful about that movie. Yeah. And you have to be able to kind of discern that.
I mean, we pulled off some things on that show. There are not very many feature films that have shot in Yosemite Valley.
Yeah.
We were able to pull that off. And they had come off a horrible experience at Universal with, for some reason, they were painting the rocks, which is like, what are you smoking? What's wrong with you people?
Yeah.
But, the opening climbing sequence was, we made some, we made some mistakes at the very beginning on that. That wall, which is at Tunnel View Park. If you've been to Yosemite, there's a parking lot where you can see the wall that you climb, El Capitan. And so when we lined up our wall, you'd get the same view that you would get if you were actually climbing. And they did a pretty good job on the wall, but when you look at the real wall at El Capitan, there's actually inside of the granite, there's a glistening, there's a life to it that wasn't coming out on the set. And so Herman Zimmerman tried to do something at the last minute, and we were stuck and we had to shoot, and it looked fake, it looked plastic. And that was, unfortunate. We probably should have left it alone. But that climbing sequence and the stunt guy that fell 390 feet, which is the largest fall ever at that point, and sort of the production things that we did on that show were remarkable. But the effects just didn't live up. That didn't help us. That helped. Once you got something to complain about, then you can point to other things and say, well, that doesn't work either, and this and that. So I wore that and I almost ended my career, because I'm the one that fought for making a change from ILM and trying something new. And on a big franchise movie, learned my lesson.
Tell us a little bit about the Academy years and obviously why that never came to fruition. I guess you could argue that it did in Star Trek 2009, but
it did. JJ used that opening scene that we had developed with David. I pitched the idea to Harv at his daughter's bat mitzvah. And I said, why don't we go back to the beginning? Why don't we have young Spock at the Academy? Young Spock, young Kirk. We demonstrated it with Star Trek 3. We can do it again. And I pitched Frank Mancuso on the back lot. I know exactly on the lot where I did it, and pitched him. And I said, don't make Star Trek 5. Make Star Trek 5, 6, and 7. Make a trilogy with the younger cast. And here's how it would look. And here's how it would go. And he listened and he appreciated it, but he said, I got a 25-year anniversary. I got to sell that. I've got this cast. I can't avoid that. I think I can make more in the box office with a 25-year anniversary than I can with starting over. And, there was precedent. I wasn't coming up with some brand new idea. Back to the Future, other things had done that. We had done it successfully on Star Trek 3. But that was a marketing decision by the studio that they wanted to do the 25-year, and they felt like that could close it off nicely for a bunch of reasons. And that was Frank's decision. Harv drew a line in the sand about that movie, expected me to stand on his side, and I didn't. And it caused a rift between us that wasn't complete, but it was tense afterwards. And we kissed and made up later, but I think that he fully expected me to walk away with him. And at that point in my career, I felt I couldn't do that. Yeah. He could, I couldn't.
I wish we had like 4 more hours to talk with Ralph Winter. Maybe someday we will.
Oh, I think he was anxious to talk more. We were anxious to talk more. I said this on the podcast. I said I was absolutely exhausted. I had no interest in sitting down and recording an episode of the podcast that day. And from the second he started talking, I just lapped it up. I was so excited about what he had to say. And speaking of people, I was excited. I know you were, especially when she started talking about the vagaries of Vulcan sex, was Robin Curtis, who played Savik in Star Trek 3 and Star Trek 4. And she was one of the most delightful, fun, candid, honest guests we've ever had on the show.
So I met Stuart Jensen and Elsa Bergeron at exactly 11:45 on June 27th, 1983.
Yes, I remember that.
And I remember very offhandedly saying to them, because they wouldn't tell you what the part was. It was all very secretive. And I said, guys, I'm not even exactly sure where this comes from, but I'm hoping that whatever the character is, it's an alien. I was correct. I sometimes doubted myself that it was the very next day, but the very next day I met Leonard Nimoy at 10:15 in the morning. I get goose pimples. And I remember he taped me. He put me on videotape. It was just one-on-one, which is highly unusual. Very often you're in a room full of people. You don't know quite who to fuss over or to make a connection with, because nobody's identified when you go into audition, right? Mm-hmm. But this was just him and me, and he was so kind. At that point, my resume was a little tragic. And he was asking me about the little dinner theater credits in upstate New York, So what was it going to be? Aldonza and Don Quixote, whatever. And Nancy and Oliver. And I'm like, yeah, I played all the witches and wenches of the musical theater. And anyway, he said, do you mind if I put you on videotape? And do you mind going out and reading, some of the sides, and I'll have you come back in and do that on tape with me? And I said, not at all. And when I left his office, he shook my hand. And he said, Robin, I have no doubt you could play this part. Now it's up to the powers that be. And I walked out of there thinking, what just happened? What just happened? Because it just doesn't go that gently. It's usually much tougher, much more stressful. The pressure mounts, and there's much more time involved and so on. But this was so sweet.
Did he talk to you much about his philosophy of Vulcans, in the sense that rather than them being without emotions, which a lot of actors tend to play it very bland because they don't act, that it actually is, they have emotions that they're repressing, which is very different than not having emotions, which was always his philosophy, which is, why he has become such an iconic character. I mean, how much did he articulate his philosophy of what a Vulcan is to you in your performance? His
method of direction was either to disarm me a little bit. At the end of the film, when Spock steps back to the line and is looking each of us in the face, he had come up to me just moments before we shot that sequence, and he said he stepped into my space a little more than he normally would, so much so that his lips were right at my ear. We're standing right there with each other, and he said, how would you feel if you were to run into someone, say, on a New York City street that you had loved and you had been intimate with, and you hadn't seen them for a few years? And I'm like, wow, big question, wanna articulate an answer for you, but I'm a little flush and a little embarrassed, but also I definitely want to come up with something for you. And I looked him in the eye, and then I looked away because I was trying to find my words, and he goes, that's it. He goes, that's it. That's what I want in that moment. I'm like, okay.
This gives me an idea, frankly.
Okay, go.
Because of your famous scene in 3,
yes,
with the burgeoning Spock. I submit that you and I should write a book called The Joy of Vulcan Sex, and it's just drawings of hands and various hand positions.
Oh my God. I love it, Daren. Let's try it. Let's try it.
This is the $1 million idea.
Oh, poor Stephen Manley and I came to work that day, and we're like, what is Leonard Nimoy going to make us do?
Right.
We didn't know which body part would be connecting with, which body, just didn't have an idea what Vulcan foreplay would be like.
Right.
And then he comes up with this, and we're like, okay. And we went off to the edge to just make sure we imbued it with all the sort of,
with all the tenderness of a drive-in movie.
There you go. Exactly. But that was an interesting moment. Yeah. Oh God, I've put my foot in it big time now.
No, you're not. Yeah, I'm just going to come right out and say it. I am in love with Robin Curtis, and I think she's great. So there, fine, big deal.
Well, you could be a husband number 5. So no, she's great, and I just love her honesty when she tells that story about how Richard Arnold called to tell her, I got good news and bad news. She says, tell me the good news. Savik's going to be in Star Trek 6. She's like, that's great. What's the bad news? They want to cast another actress. It's like, oh my God, that poor woman. Yeah, but when we have Star Trek luminaries on, we don't always talk about Star Trek because we are film fans first and foremost. So one of my favorites when we had the great Tom Perry, who was an executive at Paramount, developed Star Trek: The Motion Picture and was the executive in charge of production until he swapped with Jeffrey Katzenberg. Tells us just an absolutely wonderful story about a movie we all loved, 1980s Airplane, and how could have easily gone down in flames.
We had talked about the strategy of getting Barry Manilow in the movies. And I thought, when I said to him, well, the very first movie that Barry does is going to have to be, a really experienced director, somebody like what's his name? Ross, who had directed
Herbert Ross.
Herb Ross, yes. Somebody like Herb Ross.
Right.
And he said, oh, absolutely, yes, he's got to be protected, blah, blah, blah. So I called up this young man. I can't remember his name. But anyway, they said, hey, John, how are you? I just came out of a production meeting, and Michael Eisner is telling me that Barry Manilow might do Airplane. Can you tell me, where this comes from? He said, oh yeah. He said Sue Mengers sent over a pile of scripts, from the various studios that are in production. And he said, I was reading them all, and the one that really stood out was Airplane. And I thought, just my luck. The only guy in town who thinks this movie is viable, because everybody else thought this is a piece of shit. Who's going to make this movie, right? So he reads it, and he goes back and he says to Sue Mengers, he said, wow, this would be great for Barry, right? Wow. And I said, geez, John, I said, do you realize that the three guys who wrote it are also going to co-direct it? I said, this is only the second movie they've ever made. And I said, we have a really, really low budget. It's going to be like $1 million. And there was this long silence. And he said, really? He said, this is only their second movie? I said, yeah. I said, it could be a gigantic hit because I think it's going to be amazing because it's so funny. But it also could be a gigantic flop. This is really a risky project. And so he said, oh, well, let me think about this. And he hangs up. And about 20 minutes later, my door is closed, and it's right next to Michael Eisner's office. And the door slams open, and Michael strides across to my desk, and I'm like startled. And he puts his hand on the desk and he sweeps everything across the desk. And he said, Barry Manilow is not going to be in the movie, and it's your fault. And I said, Michael, you're kidding me. Barry's not going to be in the movie. What happened? He said, you know what happened. I know you did this. I know you did this.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, Michael, I don't know anything about it. And he said, don't ever talk to me about that picture again. Ever.
Well, that was interesting. Could you imagine Barry Manilow as Copacabana?
Oh my God. The mind is boggled by that whole thing and how that would it have worked? I don't know. It's fascinating to think about.
Thank God.
In some reality, it exists.
But thank God Paramount wasn't ready to take the chance again.
Oh, I see there. That's
Yeah.
Like
Mandy.
Two ships that pass in the night.
Indeed. But Tom was a great guest. He also talks about how he made a lot of money on Star Wars, even though he had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And I love that story. How after seeing Star Wars or reading the script of Star Wars, he put a ton of money into 20th Century Fox stock before it opened, being one of the few people that thought that the movie would do something. And he said he paid off all his college debts. So
Tom is great. When we first were talking to Robert Wise about the director's edition back in the late 90s, he said contact Tom Perry because he was there from the beginning. He helped bring me into the project, and he just couldn't stop saying glowing things about him. So and this was proven in his small visit with us.
but it's not always, on the show about covering the big stars or the people who made the movies or the TV shows. Sometimes it's about the fans themselves. And I have to say, he's not a household name, but there
Not
may
yet.
have been no greater moment than when we had the Organian himself, the trivia master, Rafe Needleman, come on the show. Now, for those of you who don't know, there was a book in the mid-'70s that was published called the Official Star Trek Trivia Book by Rafe Needleman, and it became a running gag on the show. And Rafe,
He
who
heard the
was
show.
actually was listening to the show, heard us talking about him.
Yeah.
And then got in touch with us and flew himself down from San Francisco to be on the show and tell us the origins of the book and take some good-natured joshing about calling himself an Organian.
Well, it was funny because we were very genuflecting, and then when we didn't hear anything back, it got a little more.
Well, that's what happens.
I got to tell you, my introduction was not you guys reaching out to me. I was commuting to work, and I'm listening to this podcast in the car. It's the first time I had heard this podcast, and I'm only listening to it because it had shown up in some list as science fiction podcasts actually worth listening to.
Right, right.
And I have a really long commute. So I'm in the middle, I'm on 280, driving it's stuck in traffic, and listening to the podcast, and this, but can you answer this question from, and I'm like, no, they're not going, no, that was too long ago. Rafe Needleman. And I'm like, that's me. Oh my God, that's me.
Goodness. I believe there's a word for that. It's called kismet.
Yes. So that's when I sent the note to you. It's like, I am Rafe Needleman. We need to talk.
That's hilarious.
That's right.
I mean, I'm sitting here. I can't think of you as somebody other than you stepped in front of my great interest in my life, and you just stood up and said, I know more about Star Trek than you by writing this book. I was like, who is this person? I was 12, admittedly. Yeah. And I'm like, who, you dare? And then, of course, I was not an Organian after going through your book. There were questions I didn't answer correctly, and I felt resentful of you, and it's been resent for the better part of 38 years.
We can settle this like men if you want to.
Oh no, I bow to you, the Organian.
That was loads of fun. I wish that we could have like a big, game show where Rafe is the trivia master that lords over everyone and tests their Trek knowledge. I think that would be hilarious.
I agree. I have to say, and what I think one of the other moments that really resonated for me in terms of fans that we've had on the show, the wonderful Dan Matson, who was good friends with Gene Roddenberry and George Lucas, who started the original Star Trek, Lucasfilm fan club and the original Star Trek fan club. He's a little person, and he talks about how seeing Michael Dunn on Plato's Stepchildren when he was at his lowest ebb inspired not only a lifelong love of Star Trek, but taught him to sort of love himself, and then sharing that story with Bill Shatner. It's a remarkable moment, and we want to share that with you now.
I really had never bothered to watch Star Trek. I hadn't had any interest in it. But for some reason, I grabbed my chocodile and my glass of milk, and I down and I sat next to my brother, and I happened to watch the episode that was on that day, and it just so happened to be that on that specific day, the episode Plato's Stepchildren was playing.
Wow.
And suddenly, I get to see, I'm watching this episode, and all of a sudden here comes this little guy that looks like me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? And I mean, I just come from being made fun of for being a little guy. And so I sit down and I watch that episode, and I'm telling you guys, it was like a light bulb going off. It was like the hair standing up on the back of my my neck. And I was watching that, and there was the one moment in that episode when he sits next to Captain Kirk and he says, "What's it like where you come from?" And Captain Kirk looks at him and he says, "Alexander, where I come from, size, shape, or color makes no difference." And I mean, it was like an explosion going off in me. I was like, oh my God, how would it be to be in a world like that, where nobody judged me for how I looked and my size, but they judged me for what I had inside. And then, of course, at the end of the episode, he gets to beam up to the Enterprise with them, and that was it, man. I became a hardcore fan. I watched every episode that ran every day after that, and I went to my first convention where everybody accepted me. They didn't care whether I was little or not. You know, they were dressed up as Klingons and Romulans, and you know, everybody was equal, and that's where it all began. And
one of the biggest joys in that movie was giving you having you accept, which was very generous, to play Michael Dunn, you know, in Plato's Stepchildren, you know, and it's a quick throwaway, but people who are fans of that episode of Star, they get it. I mean, you as playing Alexander in Star Trek, it's so great. I mean, I just love that.
Like coming full circle for me, Mark, when you gave me the opportunity to come out and play Alexander in that whole scene, and that night filming that with Shatner, and it was kind of like, you know, my whole story came full circle, you know, and now here I am being in this amazing film that you guys made, which I still watch, you know, all the time. You know, I'm really proud of that.
That movie was about celebrating, you know, the impact that Star Trek had on our lives. You know, it was kind of a refutation of the Saturday Night Live Get a Life skit. You know, it was kind of like Star Trek meant much, and it set us on our path, and we fell in love, and it made a difference. So like the idea, knowing your story and how Plato's Stepchildren had impacted you, it was like really wanted to pay homage to that. It's people whose lives were literally changed by Star Trek.
And I'll mention this as a Bill Shatner story. The one time that really meant a lot to me was maybe the second or third time I interviewed him. No, it was the second time. And I flew out to LA and met him at his office. And we sat down on a couch. And I'm sitting here, and he's sitting literally next to me, and just kind of looking down at me, almost the exact same position as Alexander and Kirk were in that episode. And I told him that story, and I could see him getting kind of goosebumps on his arms. And I still remember this, you know, he's like, oh my God, Dan, that's an amazing story. And he almost felt, I could see him, you know, I swear I almost thought his eyes welled up a little bit when I told him what that had meant to me, and what that episode, how important that was in my life. And that moved and motivated him so much that when he came around to write his book, Get a Life, he decided to do a chapter on me. And he called me up and wanted me to retell that story again of how that had changed my life. And so that's now documented in that book, Get a Life, that he wrote.
And what's great is that he remembered it and it stuck with him all those years. Because I will say, you know, I love Bill, but, you know, him kind of remembering stuff is not one of his, you know, it's in one ear out the other. And so it's really remarkable that, you know, that had that potency, that after all those years, he remembered, you know, that story that clearly really touched him.
What a moving story, and what a you know, he's been a lovely person ever since I've known him, and he what a great story of his success and where it all came from.
Absolutely. I mean, Dan's a great guy, and you know, what is that line in Megaforce? The good guy.
I'm glad I don't know.
The good guys always win, even in the 80s.
Okay.
Yeah, it's probably best. But Persis Cabato was in Megaforce. So,
well, this
so
is
there.
true.
Yeah. So listen, I have to say, you know, we have a lot of good memories of Comic-Con, and you know, 2 years now not being there, it's really become a special place, you know.
Absolutely. There's a big gap in our lives because it hasn't been around to go to.
And they've been very generous in providing us a platform to talk about the things we've loved, and been lucky enough, you know, a lot of my projects from Free Enterprise to Pandora to other things that we've had the chance to talk about and show and there at Comic-Con. But you know, Star Trek to me is such a huge part of it. I mean, I know you had some incredible Star Trek experiences at Comic-Con as well.
Well, you know, of course, all our close friends are, to one degree or another, Star Trek fans. But the concentration of fandom that happens in, it used to happen in the Green Bar and the Marriott, or at various other locations in the San Diego area. It was very magical. I mean, it sounds stupid, and get over yourself, Daren. No, it was, because all this positive energy and positive love for this kind of stuff, and specifically Star Trek, with some of our friends. I mean, I remember a discussion at probably 2:30 in the morning with Robert Meyer Burnett, discussing how we realized that a bunch of the titles of TOS episodes are euphemisms for sexual acts. And it's just one of these things that it's partially due to, maybe various levels of drink, but it also has to do with the whizzing around in your mind of all this energy and fun and memories and just sharing your joy with others. And it's just, there's nothing like it in fandom. It's such a great connection. I mean, that's what they're for. A convention is a gathering together of people.
I had my Saturday Night Live Get a Life moment at Comic-Con with I remember, I was at a bar and mutual friends with people. And so Marv Wolfman came and sat down. We were all drinking with Marv and having a really nice, conversation about his incredibly, long career doing, some of the most brilliant comic books for, DC and Marvel, and talking about Titans and talking about all this stuff. And I had to do it. I'm like, Marv, you were working for Marvel and wrote this Star Trek comic about a haunted house in space that was a two-parter. And before you got to resolve it, you left for DC and never finished it. How are you going to end it? He's like, I have no freaking idea. But Comic-Con is the place where you can have those conversations.
Yeah.
And live to regret them the next day when you're sober. But it's remarkable. And we've been lucky enough to do the SmackDown now for Star Trek SmackDown for 15 or 20 years. It's insane.
It's 18 years this year, Mark.
Oh my God. And the Enterprise has won 17 of those?
Something like that. 1701 times.
One of my favorites is it's become a joke that the Enterprise always seems to win for some reason. People think it's rigged, which of course it's not.
It's not.
It's just we have more compelling arguments for the Enterprise over all these other ships. But I remember when the Enterprise was destroyed in one of the early rounds, and then we had the round later on where the Defiant comes out of interface and basically ends up winning. We had the Mirror Enterprise show up one time, and oh God. But of course Neil deGrasse Tyson, arguing about why the Enterprise
why it should win
the ship, because it was the most brilliant, beautiful.
The one time that I'm not at a SmackDown.
Yeah, I know. And I'll never forget that. I remember you calling me on Monday or Tuesday after Comic-Con saying, I can't believe the one time I'm not on SmackDown and Neil deGrasse Tyson comes and does a monologue about the Enterprise.
Heartbroken.
It was so many great memories. And, the sign of these great memories is that there's so many stories either we can't share publicly or that we don't remember that are lost to the sands of time.
Right.
And
a lot of them overlap a lot.
Yeah. But look, I met you because you were doing Talk Trek, the convention on the air.
That's right.
That's what it was called. And we actually ended up, the first time I seen you as a guest, I was a guest on the show a couple of times. Didn't really know you very well.
Right.
Was impressed with your DJ acumen on that show. He was the only one who knew what he was doing. And but it was like shortly thereafter that we sort of hung out at Comic-Con.
Yeah.
Which is where we really became friends.
Yeah.
Because you were like, you would come down and we were all hanging out at the time. I think I was doing Sci-Fi Universe or one of my 9,000 magazines. And that's where we really became friends.
Yeah.
At Comic-Con. And you're not the only one. I mean, Rob Burnett, who's a frequent guest on the show, I met at Comic-Con when we were sponsoring a screening of Oblivion with George Takei.
It is the nexus of our fan life.
It is the nexus, but more entertaining.
Well, I'm speaking of its dictionary definition rather than the reference to Star Trek Generations.
But we've been doing the show for a long time because we love it. We're doing it for Comic-Con at home because we love Comic-Con. We love the organizers, the people that program Comic-Con who've been so good to us over the years, and want to support you in what is, a tough times, lean times for you guys, and we know it. And we're really excited and hopeful that next year Comic-Con will be back bigger and better than ever, and that we'll be there to be a part of it and share the excitement with you. So on behalf of Daren and myself, we want to wish you to live long and prosper. And of course, you can listen to our show, Inglorious Treksperts, every Friday, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can download the Electric Now app where you can stream video versions of this podcast. It's very simple. It's so simple, even a child could do it. And you download it and you watch on Electric Now, where our video podcasts, including Inglorious Treksperts, the 430 movie, Best Movies Never Made, are all available, and you can watch them on video along with great television and movies from the Electric Library. We also have a new podcast, Treksperts Briefing Room, where on a weekly basis, we curate significant episodes of Star Trek with writers, producers, stars, and superfans as we do audio commentaries for episodes of Star Trek from all the series, from Star Trek to Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and
Discovery.
We did Discovery recently. So there you go. But we're so thrilled to have you join us for this very special Comic-Con at home. And we hope we'll see you next year at Comic-Con, not at home, because I can't have you all over the house. It's just not feasible. And, I can't afford the bar tab. So until then, we hope to hear you and see you on our podcast next week. But keep on trekking, ingloriously, of course.
Welcome back to the 430 movie. We got our expert programmers here to curate fantasy theme weeks of classic films.
From 1998, film directed by Steven Soderbergh called Out of Sight.
Yes.
Soderbergh directs it with such a sort of confident, self-assured style.
Lex Luthor in Superman.
What is it about Gene Hackman that...
His performance, it's off the charts, but still in reality. Fiendishly gifted.
1981 Sam Raimi opus, The Evil Dead.
Oh, yes. Right? Fine choice.
Sam Raimi invented entirely new ways to get shots that should not have been possible with the amount of money that he did not have.
Charade.
Yeah. Oh, so
directed
good.
by Stanley Donen. It's a textbook screenplay. It's just effortless, and there's not a wrong note in this movie. Can't say enough great things about it. We'll be back next Friday with an all-new episode of the 430 movie, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Join us now for the 430 movie.